Este-Oeste, la última colonia de Philippe Sands, a quien desde ahora quiero felicitar por su extraña labor de hacer fácil de comprender un proceso tan complejo que se extendió en el tiempo por medio siglo y que resultó tan doloroso para tantas personas. Philippe Sands describe la segregación del archipiélago de Chagos en el Océano Índico desde el resto de Mauricio y la posterior expulsión de sus hogares de miles de isleños. Además, el autor narra todo el proceso de descolonización posterior en el que el propio Sands tuvo un destacado papel como abogado de la parte demandante en el Tribunal Internacional de La Haya. Territorio, ocupación, población desplazada, colonos. Hablamos de la última colonia británica en el Índico y, sin embargo, parece que estamos hablando o parece que estamos leyendo los titulares de cualquier periódico esta misma mañana con la guerra abierta de Rusia y Ucrania o entre Israel y Palestina. Aunque el origen de los conflictos sea bien diferente, el elemento que motiva el dolor de las víctimas parece ser el mismo: el derecho que se arrogan las naciones sobre determinados territorios por razones históricas, estratégicas o religiosas. Efectivamente, la publicación de esta obra de Philippe Sands tiene la enorme vigencia internacional, pero también nacional. En España, Gibraltar sigue siendo un territorio en reclamación que Naciones Unidas define como territorio no autónomo pendiente de descolonización. Por otra parte, el término autodeterminación, utilizado por los partidos independentistas en la España actual, tiene su origen etimológico en el proceso de la descolonización. Espero poder hablar de todo ello con el señor Sands y con ustedes a lo largo de la tertulia. Volviendo a esta última, a la última colonia, Philippe Sands nos hace recorrer 3 senderos. El primero de ellos es la historia personal de Lis Bielissé, que junto con su familia fueron injustamente expulsados de la isla de Paros Banjos en 1973, a la que no pudieron retornar hasta pasados más de 45 años. Ella es la protagonista del relato que sirve a Sands para colocar el foco del drama en los desplazados forzosos, en las víctimas a quienes él puso voz en el Tribunal Internacional de La Haya. De esta forma nos recuerda que las injusticias cometidas bajo la excusa de políticas geoestratégicas internacionales siguen siendo eso, injusticias que deben ser reparadas. El segundo sendero por el que nos introduce Sands en su libro es precisamente el de los intereses económicos y geoestratégicos entre Reino Unido y Estados Unidos en esta zona, que se dilataron en el tiempo por más de medio siglo, dada la especial situación geográfica del pequeño archipiélago. Sands desvela las falacias, las verdades a medias, los intereses no revelados y, en definitiva, la arrogancia de Occidente en este proceso de descolonización y en tantos otros que el autor menciona sucintamente en su libro. Finalmente, el lector es testigo de cómo va madurando este joven abogado londinense según avanza el proceso judicial, viajando de continente en continente como un Phileas Fogg contemporáneo, hasta que finalmente logra ser escuchado por el Tribunal de La Haya y ganar el caso, pese a las reticencias de Estados Unidos en considerar inaceptables las propuestas del Alto Tribunal. 3 senderos que confluyen en uno solo: la restitución en 2019 de Lis Bielissé, de su familia y del resto de los habitantes desplazados de Paros Banjos, que en definitiva es el fin de un sistema colonial de enorme arraigo en Occidente. Si quisiera empezar tal y como empieza el libro. El libro empieza con una pregunta que es toda una declaración de intenciones y que justifica en realidad todo el libro. Es la pregunta que Lis Bielissé le hace en el Tribunal de La Haya y realmente es emocionante tal y como lo cuenta. La pregunta es: ¿por qué hemos tardado tanto en venir a La Haya?
Pepe, firstly, thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
really lovely to be here. And thank you to the Festival Eñe, and thank you to the bookshop, and thank you all for coming. It's really appreciated. I think one has to situate that question in a broader context. The question, Lis Bielissé is a remarkable person. She was born in 1953 on a small island called Paros Banjos, population 400. She cannot read and she cannot write. And at the age of 70, she appeared as a witness at the International Court of Justice and made a statement that lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds and transformed the entire case. It was extraordinary to be there. When I got to know her, she described to me what happened on the 29th of April 1973, when for the first time she saw something she had never seen before. Philippe, she said, I saw a white man. I had never seen a white man before. And he came to me and he said, tomorrow you will leave and you will take with you no more than one suitcase. And the next day she did leave. She was newly married. She was pregnant. She lost her baby. She described all of that to the judges of the International Court. It was, but within a very dignified way. And 50 years later, she found herself at the International Court of Justice. Quite miraculously, I think she felt, a court presided by one judge who, she said to me, she was very surprised to see a black man from Africa as the president of the International Court of Justice. Her question to me in the courtroom that day, in September 2018, I think is a question that gets asked all over the world. Britain has not begun to come to terms with its colonial history. I'm working right now on a new book about the arrest of Augusto Pinochet in London. The real story of Pinochet in London is that it's prosecuted by people who were never able to get Francisco Franco. And the question that Lisby put to me is a question I could put to all of you. How can it be that in 2023, this country has done nothing to deal with the crimes that took place 75, 80, 90 years ago? And it's a universal question. Things happen long ago for reasons that are very complicated, and societies decide they don't want to address them. They push them away, and they're happy looking at the crimes of others, but they don't want to look at their own crimes. In the case of Lisby Elysée, I think she's been very lucky because by a series of accidents, and they are accidents, that I describe in the book, she found herself in the rare case of colonial history, maybe the only case of colonial history in which a wrong that was done a long time ago came to international judges. So the question she put is an emblematic question that I think many individuals in many societies could put.
No lo traía esto aquí, pero esto último que ha dicho me recuerda mucho a una conversación que le escuché recientemente en YouTube con el juez Castresana, donde se hablaba de justicia y paz. Fue un diálogo, no logro recordar el nombre de la otra persona, que era alguien de Estados Unidos. Usted defendía la necesidad de poner justicia por encima de todo en los procesos, como el caso de España, mientras que la otra persona, el interlocutor, que no recuerdo el nombre, hablaba de que la paz está por encima de todo. Ponían el ejemplo de España y de Argentina como el epítome de lo que sería esto, es decir, España sería el caso del país que decidió poner la paz por encima de todo, y Argentina el ejemplo del país que decidió por encima de todo la justicia y aún hoy está juzgando a determinados elementos de las juntas militares. Sí me gustaría, porque me parece que viene muy al hilo de la conversación, que definiera en este momento cuál sería un poco su posición en relación a estos dos platillos de la balanza.
I think about this a lot right now in relation to Ukraine. As some of you will know who've read Calle, Este-Oeste, I've become very close to Ukraine. My grandfather was born in the city of Lviv. I go very often to Lviv. I feel a very big sense of empathy with the people of Ukraine. What price will the people of Ukraine be willing to pay to stop this terrible war? I know that there are criminal investigations now in relation to the crimes perpetrated. And Russia has made it clear that it is a precondition for negotiations to settle this conflict, that all the justice initiatives are taken off the table. The ultimate issue is, it is for the people of Ukraine to decide, not for anyone else, what the conditions in which this conflict will come to an end, and the balance between peace and justice. But what they know, as you know as a Spaniard and I know as a British, that when you bring a conflict to an end, the mere fact that people stop killing each other does not stop the legacy or consequence that has been unleashed. And in Ukraine, this is particularly acute because Ukraine has not come to terms with the fact that many Ukrainians in 1941 were very, very pleased when the Nazis arrived. And many Ukrainians were very actively involved in killing Jews and Poles. And there has never been an accounting of what happened. I mean, let me give you a graphic example of the consequences of amnesia. Some of you will remember that last month, President Zelensky went to Canada. And he went to a meeting of the Canadian Parliament. And the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament invited to the Parliament a 98-year-old Ukrainian Canadian war hero. The next day, after hundreds of people stood and applauded this man for 3.5 minutes, it emerged that he was a volunteer in Otto Wächter's Waffen-SS Galicia division. And some of you will have read Ruta d'Escape. It's the same group, it's the same people. So the legacy of history comes back to haunt time and time again. And as you can imagine, in Russia, that moment went viral. President Zelensky applauding for 3.5 minutes a Ukrainian who fought for the Nazis. You can imagine the consequences of that in Russia.
Un tema que me parece muy relevante en nuestro país, que es el tema de la memoria histórica en relación al franquismo. Bueno, no todo el mundo piensa que da igual y no todo el mundo piensa que no se están haciendo cosas. Se están haciendo cosas y quizás hay una parte de España que piensa que más vale que lo dejemos para el futuro y hay otra parte probablemente que piensa que es el momento. Y quiero traerlo un poco al contexto de sus declaraciones. He querido entenderle entonces, y quiero que sea un poco más específico con esto, que está bien que lo primero que hagamos y lo primero que hagan en Ucrania sea la paz para luego hacer la justicia, porque la justicia siempre va a tener un tiempo. Es decir, el libro que usted ha escrito es un ejemplo de esto. La injusticia se cometió durante 50 años, pero la paz en 2019 logró alzarse. Quizás es este un poco el ejemplo, o quizás es un poco lo que los españoles, el acierto, si quisiéramos, de la transición y de lo que ocurrió en España con el franquismo. Y perdóname que le hago una cuestión tan nacional nuestra, pero sí me interesa que con la visión externarnos de su opinión.
I have to be very careful.
No, you don't.
You have to understand also that there's a lot of Spaniards in my family. My mother-in-law, who I'm very frightened of, is Spanish.
Who you mentioned in the book.
And there will be someone in the audience who will report back to her what I say. So I'm not an expert on this issue. However, I have been immersed for the last 8 years on this wretched book about Pinochet. And in order to write that book, I've had to immerse myself in the intestines of the Spanish legal system. And it's completely fascinating. Because like any legal system, it turns ultimately on the role played by certain individuals. And so, to go straight to that story, when Juan Garcés and Carlos Castresana and Baltasar Garzón and Laura Soria moved towards bringing a case against Pinochet in the Spanish courts, they hit a brick wall. And the brick wall is called Eduardo Fuenjarino. So this is really interesting for me. I have no idea who this Eduardo Fuenjarino person is. I've never heard of him before. And when I begin to explore, I learn, and it was confirmed to me again this morning on my train journey here from Barcelona to Madrid, that he has a certain history with Mr. Franco. And the answer, I think, to your question, Pepe, is peace and justice is not a zero-sum game. It's a balancing exercise. But if you're going to move to peace taking a priority over justice, you do, for it to work over the long term, I think, also have to have a form of accounting, storytelling, or legal process, or truth and reconciliation. And actually, I think they're all interconnected. And my hunch is that in Spain, this has not been done through legal process, but it's been done through literature. And that has been one of the means of providing an accounting for what happened in the past. And personally, I have a very open mind as to how a society moves from a situation of conflict to a situation of tranquility. I don't think it should be only about criminal legal processes. It could also be by other means. And I think that's what we're not yet very sophisticated about doing. But the one thing that I do know is that a society that does nothing will find that the issues of the past will come back to haunt it at some point.
Muy bien, bueno, sí me gustaría volver al libro, salvo que alguien tenga algo que comunicar. Sí me gustaría volver un poco al libro, porque el libro lo merece, ¿no? No es que este tema no lo amerite, pero me parece que el libro lo merece y realmente es una obra que recomiendo ampliamente su lectura. Le decía hace unos momentos a la directora editorial, a Silvia Sesé, que es un libro que toca temas muy duros, temas que se alargan durante mucho tiempo. Yo creo que es una película maravillosa. Yo creo de verdad que es la narración de una historia que es muy potente. Y me gustaría volver a la narración, o mejor dicho, al inicio de la narración. Me gustaría saber cuál es el origen suyo con esta historia. ¿Cómo se entera por primera vez? Porque me parece que es muy interesante, está muy bien descrito en el libro, pero ¿cómo se entera de esta historia? ¿Cómo llega hasta usted? ¿Y cómo decide, o por qué decide hacerse cargo de esta historia? Que entiendo que ya saben que es la defensa de Chagos en el Tribunal de la Haya, Tribunal Internacional de la Haya.
So I'm going to be very honest.
Please do.
I knew nothing about Chagos for the first 50 years of my life. And then I went skiing with my brother in April 2010. And while I was sitting on a chairlift 100 meters above the snow, my telephone rang. I ignored it because I've learned that wearing gloves and picking up your telephone on a chairlift is a dangerous thing to do. So I ignored it. It stopped ringing. 5 seconds later, it started ringing again. I didn't take it. It stopped ringing. 5 seconds later, it started ringing again. So I thought, okay, this must be important. Looked at my telephone, got the telephone out, and I saw that it was a number which I did not recognize, +230. So I'm a very curious person, and I didn't know what +230 was, so I answered it. And the lady at the end of the telephone said, "Is that Mr. Sands? This is the office of the Prime Minister of Mauritius, and the Prime Minister wants to speak to you now." While I'm on the chairlift. So he gets on the telephone and he starts telling me this long story about Chagos. And very frankly, I've never heard of Chagos. I don't know what Chagos is. And he's a wise man, and he senses my uncertainty. And he says, "Oh, you probably don't know what Chagos is. Diego Garcia. It's one of the 58 islands where the Americans have the base from where they bombed Iraq in 2003. And later, so I accepted to do the case. And later, I asked him why he had come to me. And he said, because you wrote a book in 2005 called Lawless World, A World Without Law, which was about the illegality of the Iraq War. And you were very strong and independent about the British and the Americans. And I wanted to hire an English barrister who was not frightened to take on his own government. And Britain is a country that has many problems like any country, but there are also many wonderful things about Britain. And one of the most wonderful things about Britain for me is they don't mind if you, as a British national, in the exercise of your professional functions, bring a case against the United Kingdom. In fact, they're quite proud that a small African country goes and finds an English barrister. France is completely different. I'm also a French national, and I think I touched on the case where I acted for a group of Pacific Island states against France in 1995 on nuclear testing in the Pacific. And today, 28 years later, the French government has never forgiven me for acting against them in a case. Un Français ne plaide jamais contre son propre pays devant la Cour internationale de justice. And that's the difference between France and the United Kingdom. And I really respect that about the United Kingdom. I think it might be the only country in the world where this happens. There's one exception to the rule. The only time they got upset with us on the Chagos case was when the Prime Minister of Mauritius accused the United Kingdom by forcibly deporting 2,000 people of doing something that was like a crime against humanity. And then they got very, very upset.